Section 6.3. How to test your code. There are a number of good ways to test your code that vary from quick tests you might perform just to check if your code is working for yourself to tests that are built into a company's regression test suite. For production code, Python programmers typically use testing tools more powerful and full-featured than what we're about to demonstrate in this chapter. The most common of those tools is PyTest, which is a module that needs to be installed before it can be used. We feel that PyTest is beyond what we need here to introduce the core ideas of testing. We'll focus on more lightweight testing to help you gain confidence that the code from Copilot works properly. We can do that either by testing at the Python prompt or using a built-in Python module called doctest. Section 6.3.1. Testing using the Python prompt. The first way to test is in the Python prompt through the interactive window like we have in the previous chapters. The advantage of this testing is that it can be quick to run, and you can easily add more tests as a result of output from the previous test. The tests we've run so far are examples of testing with the Python prompt. For example,
see this code?
In running that test, if you expected the result to be cat, you'd be pleased to see that result. However, if the test shows that your code was wrong, you now have the opportunity to go back to fix it. After you fix the code, you'll want to test the new code. Here is where you may go wrong with testing using the Python prompt alone. When you come back to test the code you just changed, you might be tempted to run just the test case that had failed previously. However, in fixing the code to correctly address the test case that had failed, you could have introduced an error that would cause the previous test cases that had already passed to now fail. What you really want then is a way to run not just your current test, but all previous tests as well. Section 6.3.2. Testing in your Python file. We won't be doing it this way. It would be tempting to then put all your test cases in your Python program, outside a function, so in the equivalent of a main function, so they can all run. This solution addresses the problem with Python prompts that we just described, but it introduces a new problem. What happens when you want your Python program to perform the main task for which it was designed rather than just run tests? You could delete all the tests, but the point was running them again if so desired. You could comment them out so you can run them in the future, but that's not a very clean solution either. What we want then is a way to run all our tests on our functions when we want to, but still have the ability to run the program. The way to do this is using a module called doctest. Section 6.3.3. Doctest. The doctest module is built into Python. The great thing about using doctest is that we simply add our test cases to the docstring that describes the function. This beefed-up docstring serves a dual purpose. First, we can use doctest to run all those test cases whenever we'd like. Second, it can sometimes help Copilot generate better code in the first place, or fix already written code that isn't quite working. Let's write that longest word function with all the test cases included and ready to be executed with doctest. See Listing 6.2.
Listing 6.2. Using doctest to test the longest word function.
In this code, we see the docstring with our test cases provided as the prompt to Copilot. Copilot generated the correct code to implement this function. We then manually wrote the last two lines of the code to perform the testing. When run, we get the output in the following listing.
Listing 6.3. Doctest output from running our program in Listing 6.2.
From this output, we can see that each test ran and each test passed. The reason these tests ran is because of the last two lines that we added in Listing 6.2.
See this code?
In the first line, we import the doctest module. That's the module that helps us test our code by automatically running the test cases when we run our program. In the second line, we're calling the testmod function from the doctest module. That function call tells doctest to perform all the tests. The argument verbose equals true tells doctest to give us the outcome for all tests, whether they pass or not. If we switch to verbose equals false, it will only give us output if test cases fail. Verbose equals false is actually the default, so you can just call the function with no arguments, and it will default to not providing output unless one or more tests fail. This can be a nice feature as we can keep the doctest running and only see the output when tests fail. In this case, our code passed all the test cases. But let's experience what happens when our code doesn't pass. If we find a word that's the same length as our current longest word, we should ignore it because we always want to return the first longest word if there are multiple words tied for the longest. That's why the correct thing to do is to use greater than in the if statement, finding a new longest word only if it's truly longer than our current longest word. rather than greater than equals. We can break the code in listing 6.2, then by changing the greater than to greater than equals, which will cause it to select the last word of the longest length rather than the first. Let's change the following line from
See this code.
to
See this code?
now. The test shouldn't all pass. In addition, let's change the last line to
See this code?
by providing no arguments to the test mod function. Verbose is now set to false. When we run the code, this is the output.
See this code?
DocTest conveniently tells us which test was run, what the expected output was, and what the function produced instead. This would catch the bug and allow us to go back to fix the error. Test cases aren't automatically run by Copilot. We commonly hear the following question: why doesn't Copilot directly incorporate the test cases when generating code? For example, if we add test cases, it would be nice if Copilot could try to generate functions and only provide us with the code that would pass those test cases. Unfortunately, there are some technical challenges in doing this, and as of the time of writing, this feature isn't yet included. So, if you add test cases, it just improves the prompt to Copilot but doesn't guarantee that the Copilot code suggestion passes those tests. At this point, we've seen how to run our tests with both the Python prompt and DocTest. Now that we know how to test our code, let's think about how this modifies our code design cycle.